My name's Anita Parker. I'm at the Seats Center for Teaching and Learning at the University of Alberta with Krista, and it's my pleasure to introduce Sarah Severson. Sarah is a digital projects librarian at the University of Alberta. Her session today is entitled Wikipedia in the classroom. Often Wikipedia is framed as something to be avoided or used very cautiously. Sarah's going to address this, and she's instead going to frame Wikipedia as an open educational resource. Instead of being passively consumed, it can be, as it's titled, it can be a wiki or an OER that students can contribute to as active digital citizens. So I will put Sarah's bit.ly to her slides in the chat, and then Sarah, you go ahead and get started.
So I'm a digital projects librarian, and I work in digital publishing and digitization. And so the Wikipedia work really sits in this kind of space of digital publishing. And so I like to think of it as a kind of experimental digital publishing. I'm also a Wikipedia editor. And so I've been an editor, I thought, for 5 years, but right before this class, I actually checked in, and it turns out that it was for 7 years, which was a little bit astounding that it's been that long. And this history kind of goes back to art and feminism. And I'm going to kind of be circling back on some of these terms, so they'll make a little bit more sense. On this screen here, I've got my email address. I've got my username if you want to kind of go see me in Wikipedia or interact with me in Wikipedia in any way. I've also got a link to the slides. So just for housekeeping, I do actually keep a lot of links to different things that I'm going to be talking about in the slides. So I just encourage you to download them so that you can kind of follow through if you're curious. And then I'm hoping we'll have time for questions at the end. I did actually time this, so we will. But I do also encourage you to just kind of throw things into the chat and like that, and we can kind of talk about them as it goes. And so the next slide I wanted to talk about just really quickly is why Wikipedia. And so partly because why am I here at the Open Educational Resource Symposium talking about Wikipedia? And I just like to remind people that it is actually an OER. So it's freely available. Anyone can create and edit pages, and everything is licensed under a free license. And so they use Creative Commons Attribution Share Alike licenses for all text on Wikipedia. And that's something you agree to when you actually edit. Another factor is that there is this real community around it to build, adapt, and change. And so that includes us as readers. I like to really emphasize that. It's not just editing, you're part of the community. When you read it, when you consume it, you are also kind of engaging there. It's really great for supporting open pedagogical principles. And so if you're looking at using kind of those types of OER resources and, practices within your teaching, this is a great kind of element there. And then just the reality that Wikipedia is consistently among the top 10 websites, right? So your students are probably already there. And so it makes it kind of an interesting thing to add in. So then we're looking also at why teach with Wikipedia. So there's lots of information out there, and I'm going to be pointing to a lot of resources later on in the talk that talk about why using it and why teaching with it. And so writing skills development is probably the most common. It is good to know that, Wikipedia's emphasis on verifiability and no original research, it does mean that students gain a different type of writing skills. So it's fact-based writing, it's not persuasive writing. We also gain a lot of media information literacy. Wikipedia is very transparent and collaborative. And so the kind of content development process allows students to gain a deeper understanding of just how that information is both produced and consumed. And if we think about them being a primary consumer of this information, there's some great skills there. Critical thinking and research skills, learning to analyze Wikipedia, to determine how well the article covers the topic, assess what kind of information is missing, talking about high quality sources and kind of going out there. Peer review, practicing peer review within the class. And so peer reviewing within their own kind of assignments, but then also within the community. Collaboration skills, this is a community, so they have to go out there and kind of work with other people. Real world value to learning. And so this is something that we hear a lot from students. And so this idea, I was talking to some professors before this workshop to kind of get a sense of their kind of real experience with Wikipedia. And one actually had on a student evaluation that they really liked that what they learned contributed to a larger good rather than a paper that just their professor only reads. And so that was kind of a nice thing to hear. And then also just the impact of the learning and the kind of work that goes into Wikipedia. So content gaps on Wikipedia are filled as a result of students' contributions. Wikipedia Education, which I'll be talking about later as well. They actually have surveyed and they see that new editors on Wikipedia are recruited through these kind of classes, account for about 19% of new contributions. That's pretty significant. And then just from my work within Wikipedia, I really find that it is empowering. So, and then there is this kind of research that it shows that improves students' motivations to learn. And so that could be definitely debatable, but within the right context, I think it's really important. And then another aspect that we have, there is negatives, right? So it doesn't work for every subject, and you do have to acknowledge that. So I was talking earlier about no original research. Right. So if you're looking for people to argue points, make their own judgments, Wikipedia is not the right place for that. There is a learning curve. And even with kind of digital native students and things, we do hear a lot about that. And this next point about being the platform and community can be a bit clunky. Anybody who's worked with Wikipedia before can kind of, maybe understand that a little bit. So there are, and those are things we don't have control over. And so when you're kind of putting your students into those environments, you just need to be a little bit aware of it. Intimidating. There has been, kind of people talking about how as a student, it's really intimidating to be writing for public consumption, interactions around there. And then again, submissions to Wikipedia requires that you're agreeing to a Creative Commons license, which I mentioned before, which can be an advantage because it makes it an OER. But you do have to think about that in terms of a student giving up certain rights to their creative work. And is that kind of, informed a suggestion? So those are kind of just some of the ideas of the pros and the cons, and we'll look at some different resources later, but just to kind of give us a brief summary. The next thing I wanted to look at is just the types of assignments. And so a lot of the times we talk about writing Wikipedia articles, but there's actually a lot more kind of things. And I wanted to look at examples of types of assignments. So the first one I'm going to look at is just critically engaging with Wikipedia as a platform. So this is actually activities that do not involve editing Wikipedia. So you may have already brought in discussions about Wikipedia into your class. This is kind of maybe a lower barrier of entry. You can have lots of really interesting conversations around who is editing, how is it being built up, what's being added. You can talk about Western-centric biases, gap analysis. I did want to include an example. And so this is a screenshot of a form, actually, which is an assignment by Professor Gordon Gao. And so he teaches an introductory class for the MA in Communications and Technology here at U of A. And so what he has a module that looks at Wikipedia and kind of explores internet governance and thinking about how is this collaboratively built on the site. And so he's using Clay Shirky's text, which is where this kind of promise, tool, and bargain comes in. But what he has is he has students in a group kind of go through this Wikipedia form. It takes them about 50 minutes and they kind of just investigate Wikipedia. He shared it out with me. I have a link to the PDF of the form so you can kind of see what the questions take, how they look like and stuff. And it's actually a really great way to just kind of really interrogate the platform in this specific way. Another example that I bring up often is a gap analysis assignment. This is really common in a lot of them. There's a great example of it actually out at UBC, and it was developed with a librarian and a First Nations and Indigenous Studies class, 220, representing Indigenous politics. And so what they're looking at is how knowledge systems like Wikipedia support and fail to provide space for inclusion representations of Indigenous culture and identity. And so Erin Fields has actually written about this quite a bit. And so you can kind of see examples of her assignment and see how they kind of broke it up. Here, this was structured as kind of 2 workshops, and you can do just the first workshop. The second workshop included some editing, and so you can kind of make a choice if you want to do that. Editing Wikipedia. And so this is probably the most common of all of the different assignments and something that we're probably the most familiar with. And here I want to kind of stress that it's not only editing, it's also things like copy editing. There's examples of removing plagiarism, translating articles. You can just engage in peer review, asking people to peer review other articles and kind of, put their suggestions into a talk page. You can add sections to articles and things like that. And I want to show a couple different examples. Again, these are all from the University of Alberta. And so this is a Native Studies class just taught last semester, and it's Colonialism and Criminal Justice Systems by Professor Nicole Legowski-Smith. The key aim of this course is that students were able to situate the Indigenous peoples' encounters with experiences in the criminal justice system within a larger colonial context. And so what they looked at was really throughout the entire class working within Wikipedia, and the end result was an assignment of a brand new article and then a reflective essay of what they looked at for, what was the experience like. I'm really looking forward to this class, partly because the class finished off already, but they're actually writing, I'm doing a presentation on Congress and kind of talking about this experience. And so I'm just really looking forward to actually hearing what they talk about. There looks like there's probably going to be a paper involved in that as well. Another example, which is not from U of A, but this is more kind of looking at group projects. And so just kind of bringing in editing, but within a group framework. And so you're emphasizing this collaboration again. This is from 2017, but it is a Voice to the Disorders class. So again, trying to look at different subject matters and how they're engaging with it. And there's a nice little write-up, and again, the links are in the speaker notes there if you want to read about that, and just kind of really tackling some of these issues out there. The fourth kind of example of an assignment that I wanted to talk about was really just building on all of these editing skills. And this example is actually from Queen's University. And so what they've done here is that they have a class in art history and feminism, and they've decided to kind of anchor it within the art and feminism campaign. And so the students are asked to build up their editing skills. They're expected to edit an article, do that research, but then it actually culminates in them organizing a community editathon. And so an editathon is an event where editors, like from Wikipedia, but it could be also any online community, they get together and they just kind of work on improving specific topics or types of content. And then they're expected to also teach back those skills. And so that's part of it. They've got a really interesting handout where they kind of go through the processes, and they do it in 4 different sections. And so if you kind of want to see how those build up into them, and it builds on these types of campaigns. And so that's the next thing I want to talk about a little bit, is just one of the tips that I like to give. And so this is tapping into existing Wikipedia campaigns or projects. So Wikipedia campaigns are just kind of groups that kind of coalesce and organize around specific topics in Wikipedia. And so they take very many different forms. The one that I've mentioned already is art and feminism. That's the one I'm most familiar with. And it's actually how I started editing Wikipedia. They go every year. They have large kind of pushes right around this time, around International Women's Day, to kind of add more topics around art and feminism. But there's lots of other campaigns. And so Black Lunch Table is another one. There's lots around with women scientists. And the real advantages of these campaigns is that you can kind of just tap into existing resources, communities, things like that. Art and feminism, for example, has lots of videos. Women scientists have kind of other projects. And so you can kind of, have people build into a community. Some students have said that this is really nice in the sense that they get a sense of community out there. And so kind of joining a larger community. So you can kind of anchor your projects. There's also Wikipedia projects, which actually a lot of overlap with campaigns, but they're a little bit more focused just on Wikipedia. It's usually not a larger group outside of Wikipedia. And here there's lots of variation in how Wikipedia projects are actually managed. And so I've got a link to the directories, and you can go in there and take a look at all of the variations. There's probably 400, 500 projects. Some are dead, some are almost dead, some are very active. Again, the advantage here of just using a Wikipedia project is the screenshot that I have is actually just a list, and this is from the dance project. And so what it is a list of everything that needs to be done within the dance categories. And so this is just really nice. You can piggyback on all of this, right? You see that there's 2 articles that need copy editing. Some of them are, they need to be completely rewritten. They're too vague. And so you can just kind of use this as a way of building up your assignments if you want to kind of look at things that need work, which is work to find, right? So that's just nice. My one quick little plug here, I'm talking about art and feminism. We are actually running an art and feminism editathon here in Edmonton. So if anybody's interested in joining, there's the bit.ly, and you can kind of join us there. And then lastly, I just want to talk about more case studies. And so I think case studies are a really interesting way to just build up and understand, what other people are doing basically with Wikipedia. And so the one on the left, Wikimedia Education, this is a collection of 13 one-page case studies from the UK. They're all organized by discipline, so you can kind of look through the different disciplines. The second one is actually from Wikipedia Education. It's about 10 case studies that are organized based on the types of assignments. And so when I was talking about copy editing and translation, you can kind of look at what other professors have done, includes things like grading, learning goals, all of that. And then they also, so they also discuss grading in this case study, which I think is also really interesting. Next part, if you want to just get a sense of what other people are doing out there, there is this Wikipedia education dashboards, which we'll talk about next coming up in the resources. But you can just search by course name. So you can type in art and feminism, you can type in scientist, you can type in chemistry and get a sense of what other people are doing. You can look at their classes. This is actually how I found a number of the University of Alberta classes. So I just typed in Alberta and went through and looked at them. So the next part of this, I'm going through this really quickly, so we're going to have lots of time for questions, is resources. And so just, okay, you're interested, you're hooked, you're curious to kind of explore more what's out there. So I've mentioned the Wikimedia Wiki Education Foundation a number of times already. And so this is often abbreviated to WikiEdu. So it is a nonprofit organization based in San Francisco. It runs the Wikipedia education programs that we're going to be talking about, and it kind of with a goal to promote the integration of Wikipedia into coursework by educators in Canada and the United States. So it's really focused on that one particular goal. It started in 2010 as part of the Wikimedia Foundation, but it has actually been incorporated in 2013. And so now it's a separate entity that kind of just sits right next to it. So they offer lots of resources. I just put two little links right there, but things like teaching with Wikipedia. A lot of the kind of information I talked about and how to build up skills came from WikiEdu. They have a really good blog. The blog has these kind of short little vignettes, often about kind of new forms of teaching, experiences of other professors. They reach out to people that are doing more innovative things to kind of do case studies. And then there is this 12-page PDF. This is a screenshot of the cover that I've got here. Which is really useful as well, just to give you a brief overview. And again, kind of very similar to this presentation, but just gives you this very introductory look. The next thing that WikiEdu does really good is it provides training modules. And so you can incorporate these training modules in whatever way you want. So you don't have to join a course or create a course. Anybody is actually open to doing these. And so if you want to just go in and kind of try out and learn a little bit about Wikipedia, you need an account, but only if you want it kind of credited. So you can just go in there without an account and go through there. I think I counted almost 100 different little training modules. So they're grouped primarily as student training modules, which is what I have a screenshot here. But there is also instructor-oriented modules, and so kind of gives you a very brief overview. This is one of the tips that the professors that I was talking to gave to me, was make sure that if you are teaching the class, even though you don't technically need any Wikipedia skills because you're going to have help, it's definitely advantageous to go through these modules. It takes about half an hour, so it's not too long, but just to give you kind of a broad overview, just to be able to structure your assignment. And then there also is, I just noticed that there's new modules that are coming out. And so Wikidata, and kind of thinking about the professional development around those. And so I'm anticipating that WikiEdu is going to kind of be branching out more out of Wikipedia specifically, and kind of including some more of these different topics. So lastly, I wanted to talk about the dashboard course page. And so this is probably the raison d'etre of Wikipedia education. This is the primary thing. And so remember when I was talking about that you could explore through those dashboards and kind of look through, this is what you're looking at. And so this is a primary way to set up so that you can create Wikipedia education courses and you can manage them using templates. And it really helps to be able to track the progress of your students. And so there's lots of flexibility. But basically what it starts with is that you need to sign up for a Wikipedia account. Then you complete this new instructor orientation. So this is what I was saying was the modules that are about 30 minutes. And then after that, you should be able to have like a little button right next door. And then you kind of like next to your sign-in page, and you'll be able to request a class. I have heard that sometimes it can take a little bit to get the class, so they do recommend doing this in advance. Obviously, when the pandemic took hold, Wikipedia education was went up like exponentially. So they actually had a wait list at a certain period of time. And this is because they are giving resources into this. And so they just needed to make sure that they kind of managed it. And then what happens after you do this is that the Wikipedia staff are assigned to your class. And so here we have the example here is that there's two different people. Universally, everybody I talked to said that the Wikipedia education staff were great. And so they helped with policy questions, they helped with just questions around Wikipedia, but they also helped with the back end. So if you had any issues with that, you could email them and you could kind of direct your questions. One example that I was asked to kind of provide was this idea of if your students have accounts and need to get them moved around, Wikipedia staff can do this, or if they are banned. And so Wikipedia is not necessarily banned in different countries, but editing of Wikipedia is by IP address through different countries. And so this is based around that there was spam or bots that were going through. And so this is predominantly China, Russia, and Iran. And so right now, if you're thinking about the pandemic and you don't know necessarily where your students are, to make sure that you kind of are aware of that. And so they can create basically a blanket exception for the singular student. But just if you have a student who's saying, I can't see the page, I can't do what you're asking me, this could be why. And so they're really helpful in those manners. And then next up, you set up your dashboard class. And so this is where it gets really modular and you can really kind of individualize it for your individual class. And so we were talking earlier about the training modules. That's what we're seeing right here. And so it's really a drag and drop interface and you can kind of pick which weeks you do what. You can create your goals, your milestones, your assignments. It's got lots and lots of information kind of in there. And you can go down and see how it's actually anchored within your entire class. And so even if it's only for one part of your class, or if you kind of revisit it at different times, you can organize it all here. So this is, again, a really great thing if you want to look at other examples, because you can look at how people have organized their classes and reach out to other professors to get a sense of that. And then lastly, once you're actually running the class, you can use the dashboard to see your students' progress. And that can be through the training modules or the different assignments. And so you can see there's quite a bit of information here that you can really see how much work that they're doing in terms of actual editing, what types of work that they're reviewing. I'm using the example here of the history of feminist thought. This is another class in University of Alberta that's been using Wikipedia education. Felice, this is her second year. And she's quite willing to kind of talk about these experiences, but she uses it quite robustly. And so not only is she having people edit specific articles, but she's also having people reviewing articles and kind of really using it in a very robust way if you want to see a full class. And there's a couple different examples of that. So this is kind of where you can see where everything is happening. Just in terms of the student view, so when a student is assigned to a class, they're setting up a username, and then they're actually being assigned and kind of monitored through the class. And so every Wikipedia user has a user page. You can go on and see what mine looks like, or just randomly pick different ones. There's a huge variety of how much information is on those pages, but any student is going to be identified as a student editor. So there is this flag to the Wikipedia community that this is part of a project, that this is a student editor. I do think that probably impacts how they're interacted with. Another thing that happens is when you're editing an article and it's been assigned in a Wikipedia course, there is actually a banner on the top also that says this editing is being done through a Wikipedia course. And so there's a very big transparency around that. One of the tips I got from a professor was to really remind your students that their usernames is public and very public. And so to make sure that they're not associating it with their real names or their online handles, existing handles. And so this is actually just a really great moment to talk about online privacy. If they do, maybe use their real name or something like that, one of the pro tips that I got is that the Wikipedia staff can actually port over all of that work. So you can contact them and explain the situation. This absolutely happens quite often. Just for a regular Wikipedia user, once you create a Wikipedia account, you can't delete it. You can't do anything like that. So you really just have to abandon it and then create a new one. And that's just for transparency's sake and kind of that they don't allow that. So next up in terms of resources is just pointing out that there's lots of literature out there for this. And so lots about teaching with Wikipedia, examples of assignments, going through your own disciplines, you'll probably find lots of different examples. You can look at Wikipedia releases a lot of the data that they have. And so you could use that in research. And so there's lots written about that. So if you want to see research, let's say in citations, information on, who's contributing, any of that to kind of talk about bias or talk about content gaps. That's all kind of really available. So that's just an example of some of the literature that's out there. I maintain a Zotero bibliography. This is open to anybody can see. If you're a Zotero member, you're welcome to join the group if you'd like. This is just where I keep the articles that I come across that I think are really good examples of something. There's no real notations at this stage, but just if you want to kind of get a really quick view, you're always welcome to use any of those. Next up for resources is the library. And so I'd be remiss to not talk about this. So contacting your subject librarians, talk to your class about research around sources, around citations. You can really lean on those skills there. I always invite people to contact me at the university. You can email me. I can connect you in with Wikipedia editors either here at U of A or within the kind of larger Canadian community, maybe direct you to resources. I'm always happy to talk to people just through assignments and kind of thinking through ideas if they want to do that. We also do maintain a University of Alberta Library GLAM page. And so last year we were fortunate enough to actually hire a Wikipedian resident here at the library. And so this is something that they developed to be able to just kind of sustain more of the information. And so it has an overview of some of the pages that she worked on. It has these resources. It has links to a speaker series that she ran last year as well. And you can go through there. I do think that the resources are quite handy. Something that she developed right at the end of her kind of term with us was exemplar Wikipedia pages. And so this is really nice when you want to look at a good page, because not a lot of good pages are, sometimes you can actually really struggle to find a really good page. And so she kind of just, pulled up an example. And so again, just really easy teaching examples if you ever need to use these. Again, this is on Wikipedia. We're really encouraging people to actually edit this, but we do not own it. And so if you are there, if you find other great pages that you think are great examples, please add them in. That's my end goal, is to actually make this a very collaborative space. And so that the community that is editing Wikipedia can kind of add this and develop this, especially in terms of the resources. Wikipedia is both rich and poor in terms of resources. There is a lot out there. Some of it is amazing, and some of it can really just get you bogged down. And so that's what I want to do here, is just kind of, find the good stuff and get people to rate it. So the last thing I really wanted to talk about was just going beyond Wikipedia. So thinking, most of this has all been about Wikipedia, and that's been really the focus of most of the teaching work so far. That's the tools that Wikimedia Education has really built up. But there's a lot more out there. And so Wikidata is a collaboratively edited multilingual knowledge graph, which is hosted through the Wikimedia Foundation. So these are all Wikimedia Foundation projects. Wikimedia Foundation has about 13 projects in total. And so Wikidata is really thinking about open source data, open data, and kind of how you can engage with it. There's some really interesting, there's a blog post that I have linked here too, if people just want to kind of take a look at how it's being used for digital archives. I really just want to maybe talk a little bit about research. And so this is a great research tool if you're thinking about knowledge mobilization and grants around there. If you're thinking about that, doing these kind of very public in very common ways can really get your sources out there. I do know of a project that just contacted me really briefly recently that's actually adding a lot of feminist literature into Wikidata and then kind of bringing out Wikipedia articles around that. And so I'm really looking forward to kind of seeing where that goes. Wikimedia Commons is another example of a project that you could work with. And so this is images, sounds, and media. And so this is what feeds into a lot of Wikipedia. But there's some great examples in those case study books of having students either in art or in different classes, if you're thinking about kind of knowledge visualization. And so creating graphs, creating little illustrations to illustrate certain concepts and adding those to the Commons and putting those into articles. I work a lot with Wikimedia Commons because I actually use it to disseminate some of our digital archives. So anything that's in the public domain, I'm free to kind of upload through there and just to kind of see where they go from the lives of their own. Then we have Wikibooks. And so Wikibooks is actually, in a lot of ways, another OER platform. It's digital textbooks and annotated text that anybody can edit. It's been around since about 2004, I think. So it's kind of interesting to see it. It's a little bit more of a prototypical platform. I'm going to admit I won't recommend it just because I've worked with Pressbooks before, and Pressbooks is a little bit better. So if you're looking at kind of creating OERs, but just to know that that exists and that has a kind of a history within these platforms. And then Wikisource is another example. So this is an online digital library of content. It's really great for transcriptions though. And so if you want to think through kind of ideas of transcription and stuff, you can upload a PDF to Wikisource and you can kind of use that platform. Another thing I wanted to point out just at the very end of here was beyond Wikipedia, but also beyond English Wikipedia, and to kind of look at different things. So if you're doing any kind of multilingual work, to engage with the different types here. And one of the reasons that I point this out is within Canada, the work being done in Francophone and French Wikipedia is really impressive. And so if you want to look at pedagogical aspects, the Université de Montréal and UQAM, both in Montreal, have really kind of robust education programs there. And so if you are comfortable in both official languages, it's really interesting to just see what they're doing and see how they're kind of building up Wikipedia within those kind of cultures and such. I don't know if I mentioned it in the very beginning, but I am also a board member on Wikimedia Canada. And so that organization is heavily based in Montreal. And so there's lots of interactions, which is where I've kind of learned a lot.